Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here. It's a true pleasure and a really very rich discussion already up to now on this panel. So thanks so much to my fellow panelists here for very insightful contributions. Yeah, maybe just to give a little bit more background of what we do at Climate Policy Initiative, and we have a big office here in Delhi as well, so hope to be working on lots of the issues that you just mentioned. But so we work with governments and businesses and financial institutions to really think about how can you drive economic growth while addressing climate change. And we do that mostly through three areas. So we provide better data. So we are known for our work in tracking sustainable investment trends, amongst others also with IRENA, where we are working on renewable energy finance. But then also by identifying new business models, more innovative business models, and by really helping and supporting the solutions on the ground that can really drive a transition towards low carbon and climate resilient economy. So I think a lot of the issues that you mentioned here around better integrated planning, governance, and equity actually are at the core of the work we do. And I try to mention them a little bit as I try to share with you now a little bit of where we stand, coming a little bit back also to like some of the bigger figures actually of how much climate finance is happening today, and then obviously focusing on renewable energy, but also on net zero, which has become really an important lens over the last few years. But then coming up with a few concrete actions and suggestions on how can we accelerate this transition towards a sustainable net zero future. So let me also start with the good news, I think building on what we've heard earlier today, and that is that over the last decade, both public and private actors have been steadily increasing their climate investments. And that is really important because particularly we know that we will never be able to achieve all the targets or the needs without the private sector. So I think I've heard that already here, and also Dr. Mathur before has referred to that, but I think that's very good news. And in our latest report, which we do annually, it's the Global Landscape of Climate Finance, we see that there is around 630 billion of global climate finance that is currently being invested, and that's really kind of investments that go specifically to activities, to projects that address climate change, both on the mitigation and adaptation side. And that's good news, so we've seen a steady increase in that trend, but I think what concerns us is that over the last 4 years, these flows have really plateaued. And it's particularly concerning because this does not yet reflect the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on climate finance, where there have been shifts in priorities, rightly so also from governments, but I think there will be a further impact. And in addition to that, and you mentioned already some of the needs, we do know that whatever climate investments we have today are falling very far short of the estimated needs, and we don't have any definite needs figures there, and I think that's something by the way we really need to understand better to also address the equity issue. Really, what are the needs by sector, by country, by region to really better get that. That's a little bit where we are today. So how can we get there? How can we increase investments? And again, we have heard about that already a little bit today. I think we have seen over the last couple of years really this momentum, this wave of momentum of getting behind this idea of getting to net zero emissions. And that's both from countries, but also from major financial institutions, which comes to your point again, which I think is extremely important. But I do want to actually single out India here, because I think India has really shown leadership, because India has updated its national determined contributions, its national goal, 2030 goal, and also launched this 2070 net zero goal in Glasgow, and I think that's a really kind of an extremely important goal because it focuses on near-term action by 2030 to really reduce the energy intensity of its GDP, but also to really achieve 50% of electricity production capacity from non-fossil fuel based energy resources. And I think this is really commendable and something that hopefully will also be picked up, and I think it's particularly commendable because there's many major emitters that have not yet enhanced their own national goals under the Paris Agreement. So I think that's good news. Another positive sign, just because you mentioned the broader financial system, is actually coming from non-state actors, as we call them, and that's another coalition that has been announced in Glasgow, which is the Glasgow Alliance for Financial Alliance for Net Zero, G-Funds. And there we have now more than financial institutions, private financial institutions, including banks, but also beyond, asset owners, asset managers, that represent more than 130 trillion US dollars of assets under management or under advisement that have committed to net zero by latest 2050. So I think this net zero lens is really important, that it really shows that climate action is being integrated more into a perspective where you also look at winners and losers, ways to really address equity issues and thinking about a just transition, which I think is so important as we go forward. So I think good news in that context, but I think what we really need to do now is to see how can we accelerate this transition, because if we look still at all the pledges that have been made up to now, we're not even close to the international temperature goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we are falling far short, even if we integrate some of the net zero targets that have been announced by some of the major emitters. So I think I'd like to finish with a few concrete suggestions that, again, build on what has been said here before, and hope that there will be some more time for questions and a discussion as well. But I think the first one is actually very nice because it's built off what you said. What we see in our work very clearly is that government policies lead the way. I think a robust regulatory frameworks that create these enabling environments for very strong investor response. So that is critical. Having governments adopt taxonomies, having governments mandate disclosure is important to have common language. It's important to have good data and really something to act upon and to really be transparent, fully transparent in order to understand where the money is actually going. But in addition to that, and we've heard that also before, I think the government can also use its power by greening its own behaviors, or I think we've heard potentially reforming fossil fuel subsidies, but also green procurement and green budgeting, which is extremely important in order to kind of use the government power most effectively. Second point comes to something also has been mentioned before, and that is we need to use public and development finance more effectively as a lever, as you said before. I think we need to think about how can we use it to address climate action in the hardest sectors and in the hardest geographies, unlocking private capital really for the more mature parts of the market. And that needs, implies that we need to increase the familiarity and also the capacity in these public financial institutions with more risky business models, with making sure that they allocate funding to more innovative approaches, including blended finance, including guarantees, which are so important, again, as Dr. Mature said before, to really help increase investor confidence. And then third, and that comes a little bit to the broader point that you made on the financial system, I think we need to make sure that we have a holistic approach, really approach where each actor, from governments to development finance institutions to the private sector, integrates sustainability into its daily strategic plans, into its daily operations. And again, that requires capacity building, so the skilling is extremely important, really making sure that we build the capacity and also integrate incentives into all levels of the institutions. And that leads me to my final point, which is, I think, what is really important to me is that we just start breaking down this siloed thinking. I think we need to foster collaboration across the financial system, really make sure that the total sum of all these commitments, all these net zero pledges translate into concrete action on the ground, and really make sure that we are aligned with the net zero sustainable trajectory. And maybe just to end, I do firmly believe that we need to change the narrative. I think we need to move away from net zero as a challenge, net zero as a cost, net zero as a risk, to net zero as a true opportunity. I mean, if we all ramp up sustainability effort, that does not only help us decrease instability and harm, but also will allow us to create additional significant economic and social benefits. So I think that comes to your point on the equity. How can we do that? So I believe we can do it, but we need leadership, and we certainly need to all work together. So let me stop here.